Ellie Dudley is the Australian's legal affairs correspondent and has been in the Bruce Lehrmann defamation matter for the past 5 days. Ellie, it's been a very dramatic week. It's obviously been emotional and taxing on Bruce Lehrmann at times. How do you think he's held up to questioning over the time in the witness box?
So it really has been a dramatic period, Claire, as we all realise that this is the first time that Bruce Lehrmann has been cross-examined. He was not cross-examined at the ACT Supreme Court criminal hearing for the crime that he had allegedly raped Brittany Higgins. So he initially started out quite strong. He gave his evidence in chief to his lawyers, and then he started getting cross-examined by TEN's barristers, and then much later in the proceedings by Lisa Wilkinson's barrister as well. The questions also related to things that he might have said to Brittany Higgins at the bar prior to them returning to Parliament House together, whether or not he bought her alcoholic drinks, whether or not he tried to get her drunk, whether he had attempted to kiss her prior to the night of the alleged rape, whether he found her attractive, things like that. So he was grilled on some serious, very serious topics, and by the end there were multiple inconsistencies in evidence that were revealed in that cross-examination.
So let's take it back to the start. Of course, these are two Liberal staffers working for the then Morrison government in the office of Linda Reynolds in the defence portfolio. Bruce Lehrmann was a more senior staffer. Brittany Higgins was a junior media advisor. And in 2021, an episode of The Project on Network 10 was aired in which Brittany Higgins said that she'd been raped in 2019 by a more senior staffer in the office. The Project didn't name Bruce Lehrmann. Why does he say that The Project identified him?
He says that there are enough identifying factors about him in that interview that people around him could piece together that it was him. So that he gave evidence about that and about the fact that after the interview aired, he had multiple people delete him off of social media. He was booted out of group chats, or other people left group chats that he was in because they wanted nothing to do with him. And this was after the interview aired that didn't name him. So his whole point is, despite the fact that you didn't name me, I was easily recognisable as the alleged rapist in this interview.
Now, he's been challenged on whether the Project interview really was the first time that he'd been effectively identified, because news.com.au's political editor Samantha Maiden had already published a story about Brittany Higgins' allegations. What does Bruce Lehrmann say about why it was the Project story that really identified him to Australia?
Yeah, so what we do know is that he has been asked a lot of questions about this news.com article and whether or not he recognised himself as the alleged rapist in that article. But he says that it was the Project interview that was the one that did identify him as the alleged rapist, and that they gave away enough information to show that he was the one who had allegedly raped Brittany Higgins in Parliament House.
Now, the Project's producer, Angus Llewellyn, is going to indicate, as far as we can discern from Network 10's questioning, that they did make multiple attempts to contact him before the interview aired. And he's given a couple of different explanations as to why he didn't go back to Angus Llewellyn. What's he said about that?
Correct. So he says that he didn't receive any communications from Angus Llewellyn until after the Project interview aired. He said that he first read emails from Angus Llewellyn while he was in a mental health facility on Sydney's North Shore. He said that the emails and the mobile numbers that Angus Llewellyn was using to contact him were out of date. They were contact details that we understand were given to the Project producers by David Shiraz, Brittany Higgins' boyfriend, that were in use when Bruce Lehrmann was working in Parliament House 2 years prior.
So in his evidence in chief, Bruce Lehrmann, via his own barrister, gave an account of what his life was like before the story was published. One of the issues that was raised was whether he kept alcohol in the office at all. This is a young guy. He was only in his mid-20s when this happened, and yet we've heard evidence that he kept multiple bottles of whiskey in his office and that was part of Parliament House culture. Where have we landed with all that? Did he have alcohol on his desk or not?
So initially we heard that he didn't have alcohol on his desk, and we heard Bruce Lehrmann tell police that he didn't have any alcohol in the office. Where we've landed with that is that is incorrect, and there was alcohol in the office. The court was shown photos of Bruce Lehrmann's desk and shown a shelf above Bruce Lehrmann's desk that had bottles of wine lined up about it. lined up on top of it, and below Bruce Lehrmann's desk, by his own admission, he had a box that he had taken from a previous office that he worked in, and in that box there was a bottle of whiskey.
He's also had a fairly tumultuous work history. He was clearly a bit of a bright young thing of the Liberal government, a very intelligent young man, but he had been in trouble once before this alleged incident. What had he done?
So what had happened was that there was a secure document. It was a secure ASIO document, and he was supposed to return it to a department liaison officer working in the office of Minister Linda Reynolds. He left that document on the desk of the department liaison officer and then said that he went to go make himself a coffee in the kitchenette. Now, I've never worked in Parliament House, but what I understand and can discern from court proceedings is that that is a big no-no. You're not able to leave highly confidential, secure documents lying out for anybody to come through and pick up, and he should have handed it directly to that department liaison officer.
He explained that at various points by indicating that he had thought that it was a fairly minor breach, that this person he knew was going to be coming back to that desk, but yet it was still serious enough to be on his record and to be a cross against his name, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and that cross against his name was just one of two that ended up in him eventually being sacked from Parliament House.
Now, coming to his relationship with Brittany Higgins, she described him in the Project interview as a more senior person and an authority figure and kind of as one of her bosses. What had their interactions been like before this alleged incident in March 2019?
So there were a couple of interactions that were highlighted throughout the cross-examination of Bruce Lehrmann, most of which he disagreed with. So, for example, Dr. Matthew Collins, TENS barrister, put to Mr. Lehrmann, "Did you once try to kiss Brittany Higgins?" He said no. "Did you once tell your colleagues that you thought that she was attractive?" He said no. "Did you once try and snatch her phone out of her hand so she couldn't order an Uber home from a work event?" He said no again. So we've heard sort of snippets of interactions that they may have had, the bulk of which Mr. Lehrmann has denied.
These are all big allegations, and you know the way these court cases go, because he's the plaintiff, he gets to go first. We know that Network 10 will get an opportunity to call its own witnesses after this, and so presumably we're going to hear from people who say, or Brittany Higgins herself will say, all these things happened.
Absolutely. So there have been many references to various Liberal staffers, security guards, people like that, witnesses to this evening. And we know that these Liberal staffers will be called as witnesses, and there's a strong likelihood that their evidence is not going to, will contradict what Bruce Lehrmann has told the court.
Of course, flirting or wanting her to stay out or wanting her to come out and meet him and his friends, which is another part of what we've heard, doesn't make Bruce Lehrmann a rapist. Network 10's got a big mountain to climb, doesn't it, to prove that he actually raped her. One of the things they've done is introduce CCTV of the bar where they were drinking. What does it show?
So it shows Bruce Lehrmann standing around a table with Brittany Higgins and multiple other Liberal staffers who we understand to be defence staffers, laughing, sort of joking with one another. There's pizzas on the table, there's potato chips that they're sort of digging into, many alcoholic drinks. And what we see as part of this CCTV evidence is multiple interactions between Bruce Lehrmann and Brittany Higgins. Now, prior to all of this, Bruce Lehrmann has maintained that he did not buy alcoholic drinks for Brittany Higgins. But what we saw in this CCTV evidence was him and Brittany Higgins go up to the bar twice and him buy her alcoholic beverages. Seemed to be spirit-based beverages, while he was buying himself beers. What was also interesting about this is that Bruce Lehrmann has maintained that he only spent $16 at the Dock Hotel, the pub, that night. We see him buy at least 5 drinks in this CCTV footage. Now, Dr. Matt Collins put it to Bruce Lehrmann, hey, it's a trendy pub in Canberra on a Friday night. Surely 5 drinks are going to cost more than $16. Bruce Lehrmann couldn't explain that. He actually said to Dr. Collins, well, that's your opinion, which is interesting. I don't necessarily think that it's just an opinion that you couldn't buy 5 drinks with $16. Basically, Dr. Collins put to him, well, there must be a third credit card. There must be there must be another way that you were paying for these drinks other than the 2 credit cards and the 2 bank statements that you have tendered to the court. But Mr. Lehrmann denied that.
The fact that Dr. Collins didn't present him with a statement from another credit card or evidence of him paying with a different credit card suggests, doesn't it, that Network 10 doesn't have actual evidence of that?
Correct. Network 10 does not have additional evidence to prove that he had a third credit card other than the two that he had presented to the court. He's also said that he never held cash, so he wouldn't have paid for it in cash, but it does leave a big question mark over how Bruce Lehrmann paid for the drinks that night.
And of course, the implication of all this is that he was buying her drinks because he wanted to get her drunk.
Correct.
Presumably, the implication of that is that he wanted to get her drunk so that he could in some way have sexual contact with her. Does she seem drunk in the CCTV?
I would say no. Just my personal opinion. You see her down a lot of drinks. I think at least 6 we see her down in that CCTV footage. And at one point you see Bruce Lehrmann amass 3 sort of spirit-based drinks in front of her, and point to them and then point to her. What was interesting about that was Dr. Collins put to Bruce Lehrmann that at that point he turned to another Liberal staffer and said the words, all hers, as he was pointing to Brittany Higgins, sort of implying that he was saying that all these drinks were for Brittany and putting them right in front of her. You then see Brittany Higgins scull a drink. So whether or not she seemed drunk, I don't necessarily know. You definitely saw her drink a lot of alcohol, but she did seem to be maintaining herself and seemed to be, standing upright and poised.
And of course, the words they're speaking at this bar, we have to try and guess what they are because this is CCTV. It's silent, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And there was mention in the beginning of the trial that there's some lip reader evidence, which is tantalising and fascinating. We haven't actually seen the lip reader yet, though, have we?
No, we haven't. So when you've got Dr. Collins putting to Mr. Lehrmann that he said things to Miss Higgins that night like drink it all, you have to assume that he's drawing on this lip reader evidence that he has gained. We did hear earlier in the proceedings that 10 had engaged a lip reader from overseas, so one in the UK that had nothing to do with Brittany Higgins or Bruce Lehrmann and didn't even understand the story up until this point. When you have Dr. Collins saying, hey Bruce, you say to her, drink it all at this point, what do you say to that? You have to assume he's getting that from lip reader evidence.
Now, one of the most hotly contested parts of this whole story is why Bruce Lehrmann and Brittany Higgins went back to Parliament House. We see more CCTV and even hear the audio this time of Bruce Lehrmann pressing a buzzer at the ministerial entrance to Parliament House that's round the back, and he says to the security guards, it's Bruce Lehrmann here with Minister Reynolds. We've been asked to come back and get some documents. Just pause there for a moment and talk about that explanation that he gave the security guards. That's very ambiguous, isn't it? It's kind of suggesting that he is there to do something either with Senator Reynolds or at her request.
So him saying that he was there to collect documents with Senator Reynolds implies that he's there on official purposes, that he's been sent there by his boss, or at least is with his boss, as you said. And he later gave evidence that the reason that he lied to security guards and said that was because he wanted to get into Parliament House, that the real reason that he was there, which he now claims he was there to collect his keys, he was worried that the security guards wouldn't buy that excuse from him, wouldn't deem it serious enough. So he said that he lied to them about being there to collect documents with Senator Reynolds.
And so both Brittany Higgins and Bruce Lehrmann, we know that Bruce Lehrmann had been at work that day. We know that they'd exchanged work emails that day, the Friday, and yet they've both gone out to the bar without their parliamentary passes and left them, at least he has left his potentially at work. Do we know where the pass was? Maybe it was at home.
I don't think we do know where it was. I don't think that there was an explanation as to where he left his pass that night. But Dr. Collins did sort of pour doubt over whether or not he had intentionally left his pass there that night, whether or not he, if he knew that he was coming back, then why didn't he take it with him? Questions like that were definitely asked.
So then we've seen some CCTV footage, and this was first aired in the Spotlight Channel 7 program, of the pair of them going through the airport-style security scanner at the ministerial entrance. Brittany Higgins has to go through a couple of times. She has to take off her shoes. This is a moment when Brittany Higgins has previously said, including in the Project interview, that she was 10 out of 10 drunk. Does she seem to be struggling with her shoes or struggling with walking?
No, she doesn't. She seems to be quite upright. She doesn't need any assistance as she's walking down the hall or anything like that. She's smiling. She's sort of bouncing along. She struggles to get her shoes back on, and so ends up sort of leaving with them in her hands as she walks towards Linda Reynolds' ministerial suite. But 10 out of 10 drunk? I don't think so.
He's also said that he was very drunk. Does he seem to be very drunk?
Also, no. He seems to be, again, upright. He goes through security sort of without any issues, comes out the other end and then walks into Linda Reynolds' suite.
And then we get to the next explanation for why he was there, which is that he needed to jot down some notes about things that he'd heard at the bar for question time briefs, notes for the minister to take into question time so that she's ready to answer questions if they're asked. And this all comes back to the French submarine contract. This is the best thing about this story, that it has huge political implications, of course, because they're working for a cabinet minister. What was it about the French submarine contract that he claims that he heard at the bar that was so important that he had to come back and write it down?
Yeah, so he claims that Linda Reynolds was thinking about moving the build of these submarines to Western Australia for political purposes. He said that the Liberals had sort of caught wind that there was going to be a political wipeout for the party over in Western Australia, and so they thought that they'd transfer this submarine project over to Western Australia in order to generate jobs, money, that sort of thing. He said that night he was having conversations about the move of this submarine project and whether or not it was a good idea. And so he later said that while he had gone back to Parliament House to collect his keys, while he was there, he spent about 30 to 40 minutes writing down on question time briefs things about these discussions that he had had that night about this submarine project.
When he was challenged about that by Matt Collins, KC for Network 10, he wasn't able to recall what he'd written down, what he'd heard, who had said it, or exactly what the conversation had been about, except that it was about the French submarines.
Yeah, it was interesting because he was able to say that it was all about the French submarines. He was able to recall that it was about moving it to Western Australia, but couldn't recall a single detail about the conversations he had actually had that night. The other thing that's probably worth noting is that this was all pen and paper, right? So he wrote it down on Post-it notes or whatever it was to annotate this question time briefs. He didn't log into a computer. He said he hasn't logged into a computer or anything like that. And so there isn't any, keystroke evidence or any, time-stamped evidence of him logging into a computer that night that proves that he was at his desk.
So the one thing that Bruce Lehrmann has been consistent on from the very beginning is that there was no sexual contact with Brittany Higgins that night. Of course, we've heard her claim that she went into Linda Reynolds' own office where there was a sofa, lay down and then woke up sometime later to find him on top of her, having sex with her, that he then left without saying anything, and that she was left there. She fell asleep on the sofa and woke up the next morning basically to leave in great distress. He has said that he, when they entered the ministerial suite together, he turned in the other direction and went over to his desk and didn't communicate with her again. That question of whether he checked on her before he says he left and went home to his girlfriend has become an important one, hasn't it?
Yeah, of course, because I think that it's the one question that Australians are all asking. The question of you go into Parliament House around, 1:30 in the morning with a colleague. You've been out with that colleague all night. You get an Uber there with that colleague. You enter, you go through security together. And then you leave and you don't check to see that they're there, or you don't call out to say goodbye, or you don't do any sort of a welfare check or anything like that. Now, that evidence that he says that, they never spoke to each other again after they entered Linda Reynolds' ministerial suite was called into question on Monday. So Dr. Matt Collins put to Bruce Lehrmann that he had told a close family friend and also told his former boss, Fiona Brown, that he had seen Brittany Higgins when leaving the ministerial suite, and that he had seen her to be happy, and that they had said goodbye to one another. So he denied that. He denied that there was any interaction, but that was put to them, which assumes that Dr. Collins has had some form of a conversation that shows him that, in fact, Bruce Lehrmann did interact with Brittany Higgins, or at least claimed at some point that he did interact with Brittany Higgins on his way out of Parliament House.
So presumably we're going to see some evidence relating to that when when Dr. Collins actually gets to start presenting his case.
Correct. And so if Dr. Collins is given the opportunity to examine Fiona Brown, that's Linda Reynolds' chief of staff, Bruce Lehrmann's former boss, she has taken a lot of contemporaneous notes throughout her meetings with Bruce Lehrmann. And so she might be able to put up some quite convincing evidence on the fact of what Bruce Lehrmann's story was around the time that these allegations were aired, and around the time that, you know, this matter was first raised with her, all the way back in March 2019. The issue with that is that Fiona Brown may not enter the witness box. We know that she has applied to reject her subpoena on some medical grounds, and also because she's overseas.
This all is going to come down to, of course, he said, she said. Brittany Higgins said in the Project interview that one of the reasons she was going public with her story was that she felt that her political bosses, that is Fiona Brown and Linda Reynolds, had made it clear that this was a political problem, that she had to basically be quiet. She even implicated Scott Morrison's former chief of staff, Euron Finkelstein, in that alleged attempt to keep her quiet. All those people have denied ever having done that. And in fact, what we have learned this week is that Bruce Lehrmann was sacked on the Tuesday after the alleged rape. But the question is, what did his bosses know about what had happened that night?
So what we understand is that when he was sacked, there wasn't an understanding on Fiona Brown's part or Minister Reynolds' part, or at least this is the evidence so far, that he had allegedly raped Brittany Higgins. So what we understand is that he had had two security breaches against his name, and that was why he was sacked. So that first one that I mentioned earlier about the ASIO document, and then secondly, him entering Parliament House after hours on the night that Brittany Higgins was allegedly raped. So we understand that those are the reasons that he was let go from Parliament House. When Fiona Brown and Linda Reynolds found out about Brittany Higgins' allegations that she was raped by Bruce Lehrmann is yet to be determined.
Ultimately, we've now heard the end of Bruce Lehrmann's evidence. Who's next?
So Bruce Lehrmann has concluded his cross-examination. He will be re-examined by his lawyers. Then Network 10 and Lisa Wilkinson will open up their cases, and then most likely the next witness that we'll hear from will be Brittany Higgins.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.